I hadn't cried in 14 years. It's like I was holding it together during the whole time. The day of the collapse, watching people come out of prisons, I just lost it. It was like, I'm allowed now to cry and feel all of these emotions. Unbelievable days.
That's our colleague, Bashar Deeb, and he is describing the day the Assad regime collapsed. We called him and investigative journalist Mais Katt to ask what that moment meant for them as journalists and as Syrians.
Before the fall of the Assad regime, I was thinking that maybe it's better to forget that I have a home over there. And then all of a sudden, in one day, like 3 a.m. in the morning, I was checking my mobile every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. I was sleeping but waking up all the time. And then I saw, oh my God, he ran away. They said, all of a sudden, I saw all these faces of people I know, the colleagues that they pass away, the prisoners, the friends.
The fall of Assad's regime in Syria has been faster than anyone imagined.
I didn't expect that I would be crying that much, but it was really overwhelming. For the first week, I couldn't understand what's going on. I felt that, okay, I became an expat now in the Netherlands. Now I can start learning the language. I can enjoy living in Europe because I'm not a refugee. It's my choice to be here or to go back there. I felt that I get back part of myself.
After the fall of the regime in December 2024, Bashar was in his home in Athens, glued to his TV for weeks.
Thinking through my personal hat, I was extremely excited. This meant to me that I could go back home. I could see my family, my cousins, my aunts. At the same time, I was also thinking through my professional hat. There were a lot of videos circulating, people invading Assad's palace, going through his things, his rooms, his drawers, a lot of amazing details to analyze. So, whatever I was doing during that week, I was feeling that I was missing on something else.
With his professional hat on, Bashar was trying to make sense of everything he was seeing. Footage of people rummaging through files of those that the regime had been tracking. Documents he could have only dreamt of getting access to before. He watched families hugging and crying as they reunited with loved ones who had been locked up in prisons for years. But what struck him most were the desperate pleas of the many more who were still searching.
Families come here searching for those they've lost. It is estimated more than 100,000 people disappeared since 2011 after being detained by the old regime.
The topic of the missing person is like the number one topic for Syrian society. Nothing matters most to Syrian society until this day more than the fate of the hundreds of thousands that went missing over the years. Watching the news and listening to people talking about the missing ones, there was this man on Syria TV talking about his sister that had disappeared with her 6 children in 2014 and how they still haven't heard of them or they were still looking for their whereabouts. There were accusations floating that orphanages were hiding children and that possibly also like an international organization called SOS Children Villages might have been involved.
It wasn't just one family. Across Syria, hundreds of parents who were put in jail by the Assad regime were searching for their children. For the past 9 months, Mais and Bashar have been leading an investigation at Lighthouse, piecing together what happened to these children, how they were hidden in orphanages under false names and used by the regime to extort families into cooperating with them. The story also traced who allowed it to happen, from Syrian intelligence agencies to a European NGO called SOS Children's Village, who for 7 years purposely looked the other way.
It's a story we worked on together with BBC Eye, The Observer, Women Who Won the War, Siraj, Der Spiegel, and Trau. In this episode, we speak to Bashar and Mais about what it meant to report this story, their first major investigation in a newly free Syria, and how we brought the findings directly to the families still searching for their children and for justice and accountability.
We'll also hear from Charlotte Alfred, Lighthouse's investigations editor, on how this cross border collaboration came together and why international partnerships are still essential for accountability journalism in Syria. From Lighthouse Reports, this is Backlight. Every month, we take you behind the scenes of real-world collaborative investigations.
We're your hosts, Impact Editor Tessa Pang
and investigative reporter Beatriz de Silva.
In February of 2025, Bashar and Mais traveled to Syria for the first time in 14 years.
The homecoming was an exceptional experience. Like Mais, I had lost hope that I would be able to visit Syria again. I think I had reached a level where I was like okay with the fact that I won't go back. I clearly remember landing in Damascus. The sun was just going up. We took the revolution flag and we were shooting videos and selfies outside the airplane. Really happy times, but I wasted no time in Damascus. I took the first taxi I saw in the airport and I went to my city, Aleppo. I only spent 2 days with my family in Aleppo after 14 years of being separated from them.
What did you miss most about Aleppo?
The food. I think everyone in Syria agrees that Aleppo has a superior food culture in comparison to the rest of Syria. This is not to say that the other cities don't have great food, but we pride ourselves in what we make.
What's your favorite dish?
My current favorite dish is stuffed vegetables. We call it mahshi. But yeah, then it was time to work. I went to Damascus. I remember us going to this prison, which was an airport in Damascus. It belonged to the Air Force Intelligence. This was the place where most of the mothers that we interviewed that were separated from their children, this is where they were being detained. I remember us scanning documents and walking around in this place that used to terrorize Syrians. It kind of felt nice, but it was also chilling and a little bit scary at the same time. A really difficult mix of emotions.
When the regime fell, it opened up unprecedented access to documents, archives, and places that had been sealed off for decades. For Bashar, it was the first time he could actually do journalism freely in his own country.
One of the first things that we thought about when we went to Syria is was like, we have this amazing sudden access to all of these documents that we never dreamt of accessing in the past. So we focused a lot of our efforts in collecting these documents, scanning them. But at the same time, we respected these documents. We didn't take any of them with us, for example, or we didn't cause any damage to them because these documents can still be used maybe in future courts to hold the perpetrators accountable. We did a lot of that, but what was really striking for me is that this moment when I realized that it's not only about documents, is that we have also sudden access to Syrians themselves. We can interview them in their houses without them being scared to talk to us.
Mais and Bashar, with their colleague from Siraj, Mohammed Basiki, set out on a trip around the outskirts of Damascus to speak with families who had their children taken away from them. We asked Mais what it felt like to interview Syrians in Syria for the first time in 14 years.
It was nice but weird at the same time. I had all the time this feeling that I'm in a cloud. I'm not walking on the ground. Everything happened was like a mixture of being confused and extremely happy and trying to adapt the feelings. Because we spent 14 years, more than 14 years, interviewing people virtually, talking to people through Facebook, through social media. And then all of a sudden I'm there, I can see people, I can go to their house. And being in Syrian people's house is amazing because you go there, they do their best, they make the tea, they don't have a lot of money, but they wanted to be sure that the house is warm.
Bashar and Mais went house to house, meeting families who had lived through the unimaginable experience of having their children taken from them while they were in prison.
I still remember me and Bashar sitting in the car and going to a small town in the countryside of Damascus and then preparing ourselves to interview this family, Majd and her daughter and her family.
Majd was a student when the revolution started. The day she told her husband she was pregnant with their daughter Maria was the day he was killed by a sniper.
كنت طالبة طب أول ما بلشت الثورة بال2011 سنة أولى. طبعاً إجت الثورة وقفت الجامعة وقعدنا بالبيت وقعدنا بقى.
In 2016, Majd was accused of being a terrorist, and she and her baby daughter Maria were imprisoned by the regime. She was originally told by prison interrogators that her Maria would be given to relatives, but when two men came to take her away, they took her to SOS Children's Village. It's a story that was echoed by the other families we interviewed as part of this investigation.
Talking to the families was very special for me because I also came from a similar background. My mom also was arrested as a hostage on behalf of my dad, and she stayed in a prison for 1 year. And then afterwards, my dad was in a prison. He disappeared for 4 years. We didn't know whether he's alive or dead. And he was in Sednaya prison. And that's why all these kids, they reminded me of myself and my sister, my brother. That's why I had always to put an extra layer of protection while I'm talking to them, so I don't involve personally in their stories.
In total, the team interviewed more than 30 families who had their children taken from them while they were in prison. There are so many stories that we can't tell on this podcast, so we encourage you to read the full reporting. There's a documentary in English and Arabic on BBC I, a podcast in Arabic, and written pieces in Arabic, English, German, and Dutch. Everything will be linked in the show notes.
Many of the families we spoke to have thankfully since been reunited with their children. But as Bashar and Mais told us, the wounds of separation, the lost years, the unanswered questions remain. Bashar told us about the story of Abdulrahman Gabais. He moved to a nearby city under opposition control to work as a paramedic, help the wounded, and smuggle medical supplies and food to rebel areas. Abdulrahman's baby, Ali, was taken from an incubator in Damascus hospital, just a few days after his birth. The first years of his baby's life were spent between detention and orphanages.
He was 3 years old when he had his son for the first time. And in the piece, we touch upon his feelings at this moment.
وقت نزلوا من السيارة تبع التاكسي وشفته من حملت بعد عمره 3 سنوات بالضبط. حملته شده عشان يشدني، هو لسه ما متقبلني كثير، كان يعني مبين من تفاصيل وشه ولا ما متقبلني كثير. إنه مين هاد؟ خايف منه. قلت له أمه هذا بابا يعني.
He didn't feel that he was holding his son. He felt that he was like smelling his son and not feeling that he's smelling his son. So he wasn't able to recognize his son's smell, but also his son didn't feel like hugging him back at the same time. One mother told us that her daughter came back speaking Arabic in a different accent than the one her own society and surroundings speak. Imagine yourself in the shoes of this mother, like every single word your daughter speak is like a painful and shocking reminder of the separation that you and her have endured in the past. There was one father who told us that his daughter didn't approach him for months after being reunited.
These are just some of the heartbreaking stories that we heard during the investigation. But understanding what families went through was only one piece of the puzzle. The other was figuring out who allowed this to happen and why.
One of the orphanages where the children were taken from detention is run by one of the largest organizations for children who are separated from their parents in the world.
That's Charlotte, the editor at Lighthouse who led this investigation. She's talking about SOS Children's Village, a European charity that raises €1.6 billion annually from the UN, European governments, and personal donations. They ran the orphanages where the majority of these children were hidden.
It was so important for the Syrian audience to really understand how the system worked and accountability from the Syrian point of view. And then for the international audiences to see how their own charities, which many of the audience may have donated to personally, how they really became enmeshed in a system like this and what the kind of blind spots were that created this situation.
So, part of the team were reporting from the ground and uncovering how the system worked from inside in Syria. Meanwhile, we also had reporters in the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands digging into the role and the responsibility of this international NGO behind it. Charlotte explained how that collaboration made the investigation stronger.
But it wasn't just the different audiences, it was also that the teams had access to different sources, that they were able to reach different places, but also we were able to challenge each other. So while we were working on different stories that had different focuses for different audiences, it was also a really important point of exchange that we could challenge each other's blind spots, that we could hear from different perspectives. And so in the end, you have a much stronger investigation because of the diversity of the journalists who are involved.
We found out that leaders in SOS Children's Village International, the headquarters, were aware that children of detainees were being taken for 7 years, but refused to do anything about it.
Staff within SOS, within both the Syria team and also the international team, were raising the alarm about what was happening. And years after the first whistleblower accounts came out, there was complete silence from the international leadership. And even until our investigation came out, when they did speak about it, their response in terms of supporting the families, helping connect families to missing children, was, for the families, completely lacking.
So 2 questions arose from this reporting. Firstly, how do we get a response from the billion-euro organization, one that boasts it's the world's largest non-profit for children without parental care, to take responsibility for their action? And secondly, how do we deliver this information to the families who are still searching for their children and looking for accountability and for justice? That's after the break. You're listening to Backlight, Lighthouse Report's monthly deep dive into the world of investigative journalism. If you want to know more about our investigations, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. Or if you have suggestions on who we can talk to on this podcast, you can always reach out to us at backlight@lighthousereports.com.
A recurring problem in journalism is that the people whose stories are at the heart of an investigation, the ones that are directly impacted, are often the last to hear of it. That can be because of language barriers and barriers accessing the reporting. We actually explored this issue in an episode released in July this year.
A big focus for the team in this investigation was not just publishing the story, but thinking about how to share the information with families in a way that was sensitive and respected the time and effort they'd given to the story. We didn't want to only just share what we uncovered, but also create a space for families to ask questions directly to the reporting team and share connections to people and organizations that were pursuing justice, so families could understand how they might seek accountability.
It was their right, in our opinion. I think the whole team, we agreed on that it's their right to get this information. At the same time, it's sensitive and it's not easy to deliver this information. So we thought about it. We took it very seriously within the team.
Throughout the investigation, the team had built connections with the UN body, the Independent Institute on Missing Persons in Syria, whose mandate it was to find missing people. They'd also built connections with NGOs who were supporting families to advocate for justice, and with lawyers who wanted to pursue legal cases. We were constantly thinking about how to use these connections in a way that could directly benefit the families, while also considering the emotional support they might need or could possibly offer each other. This is what the impact work at Lighthouse is really about, going beyond publication and thinking about how our work could make a real difference for the people at the heart of the story.
Some of these families, they wanted, of course, to find their missing kids. And some others, they managed to reunion with their beloved, but they are still also looking for the truth and for justice. They wanted the people that they were involved in this crime to go to the court and to face what they did. Some of them also, they need psychological support for their kids, or mental support or physical support. And they want to maybe take SOS to the court and see what will happen afterwards, but they don't really have the tools. That's why we tried also to connect them with the right people, with the right organizations, where they can get this kind of psychological support, they can get legal help. So we were thinking that maybe it's a nice moment to put them together or to introduce them to each other in a way. But it was hard to do that physically because also these families are distributed all over the world, some of them in different cities inside Syria, but also, for example, the family of Rebais, half of them are in the US. And then we thought that maybe it's the easiest way, that also very familiar to Syrians, is to create a WhatsApp group.
So a week before publication, each reporter reached out to the families that they had spoken with and invited them to a WhatsApp group. In the end, about 20 families joined.
We found out that many of these families, they knew each other. For example, the grandmother of Fawaz, Huda Al-Ajami, she was in the same prison in the same time with the wife of Rifai. And she said that she was taking care of her while she was at the prison. She had a problem with her arm, and then the wife of Rifai, she was helping her, supporting her, taking care of her. And then they were all of a sudden in the same group together. And that was also really nice to see these people talking to each other again. I think that also can make them think, if they want to go through a legal procedure, or if they want to help each other, support each other to find the children that they are still missing, maybe that would help them. That would give them more courage and more strength to continue what they're doing.
I also enjoyed the response of some of the families that were like very public about this topic, and I felt that it empowered their efforts to hold people accountable. Majd was in the same cell with Umama, the sister of Abdurrahman that I talked about earlier. If you think about it, it's such a powerful thing. Like, these two women went from being inmates in the same cell to co-protagonists in an international investigation 9 years after.
Hearing each other's stories and realizing they weren't alone, I think gave people a sense that there was maybe power in this and that there was something that could actually be done. And as May said, some families are talking about legal actions, while others are thinking about forming a group to fight together for justice.
While we were interviewing people, I think Bashar remembers the first question they were asking, okay, but what will happen? Then what? If I give you my interview, I give you all this information, and then I will get my trauma, I will be sad again, I will remember all these bad times. Now, when I see their reaction, the way that they behave, I think that a lot of them, they are willing to sue SOS or the other people that they were involved. I see that they believe in accountability more than before. I always believe that justice starts from the people themselves. That's why when I see them more stronger and feeling heard, feeling supported, being interviewed by different medias also after being in our stories, I really feel happy for them, and I see justice in their eyes and their voices and words.
I really liked what May said about justice starting with the people themselves. It's a reminder that journalism isn't just about exposing the truth, it's about making sure stories are accessible to those most affected in a way that's empowering to them. So, there was some important reporting around this topic of missing children in Syria that came out even before our investigation, but it was after we published that there was a response from the international charity SOS Children's Village. Tessa, can you tell us basically how that came about?
Yes, so the team made a huge effort to understand how we could get a response from this huge organization. SOS Children's Village has money flowing in from across the West. They operate in over 130 countries, but time and time again, there have been multiple allegations of misconduct and abuse, and Syria was, hardly the first example of this. The team interviewed whistleblowers, they spoke to donors, they did an on-camera interview with the head of SOS, and after the investigation published, at first there was silence from SOS International. And then about 2 weeks after publication, the head of the board of SOS Children's Village put out a public statement saying that they were horrified by the report and actually acknowledged the pain of the families and offered their apology. It was the first kind of response from SOS of this kind on what they did in Syria. They also said that they're considering strengthening accountability and oversight mechanisms, as well as review the process of how children are referred to their care by governments.
I think there are a few areas where this investigation has created some real soul searching. One is in SOS, as I mentioned, has many member associations, some of whom were not always aware of what was going on and their role in working with the senior leadership of SOS in Austria is, I think, helping to push for some deeper thinking on how they should respond to both the situation in Syria and their role in what happened in Syria, but also appropriate safeguards going forward. There's also the wider child protection community who I think is very interested in some of the issues that have been raised for SOS and looking at them more broadly across the sector. What do you do when you feel that your work is overall going to be helpful in a really repressive or a conflict-affected context? What are the kinds of safeguards you need to put in place to make sure that you don't get used as a pawn? We know that this happened constantly under the Assad regime. I think it's also been really interesting to see some of the reaction from the international justice community, some of the international and Syrian lawyers that we spoke to during the course of the investigation were very clear that there are possible war crimes that have been committed and that there is a need for accountability, both on the national level, but also potentially on the international level for some of the ways that these children could potentially be victims of crimes against humanity and enforced disappearance, and their right to family life, their deprivation of liberty are all things that I think the international justice community are now quite interested in.
This investigation has really been able to contribute to a discussion on accountability of international NGOs in conflict-affected contexts. And we're going to be keeping an eye on how SOS stays true to their promise to reform. We then asked Charlotte what this experience taught her about the role of collaboration with Syrian journalists and what it actually means for investigative work in Syria going forward.
There are so many stories to be told about this decades-long system of repression and what it can tell us about Syria, but also what it can tell us about international justice and the role of international diplomacy and international organizations, lessons that the world really needs to hear. And those stories won't come through without deep and sincere and meaningful partnerships with Syrian journalists, whether that's on a collaborative model, which is how we work, or whether it's within teams, just kind of re-examining how you work with your Syrian colleagues and partners. I've been so impressed by the serious ethical discussions that have gone on about things like making sure that we never stand in the way of any potential justice mechanisms in how we treat documents, and the deep understanding of the trauma faced by not only families of the missing, but so many people in so many different ways. I feel in very safe hands with the journalists that we've had the privilege of working with for many years and on this investigation too.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it is to navigate working on this story that's so emotionally intense on both a personal and professional level. We asked Mais and Bashar how they were navigating this.
It was one of, I think, the hardest stories that a lot of us, we ever did, because it was not only the research and the work that we need to do, but also the emotional challenges, being on the ground for the first time, investigating children cases, interviewing these mothers, fathers, all of these things, I think made a lot of pressure on us indirectly, because all these things makes the story related to us personally, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The workload was so big in this story that I think we're just beginning to process what it meant for us to work on it. And I'm sure you also, Mace, were triggered by the prison part of the story, and it might have reminded you of your family experiences with the Assad's prison.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm super happy we did it, and hopefully there will be plenty of time for us to process it.
Yeah, I really hope everyone gets time to take a much needed break. And so we asked Bashar and Mais, now that Syria is free, how do they see their role as investigative journalists?
After the fall of the Syrian regime, or at the same day, like I was thinking, are we done? Everything is okay now and we don't need to, to do journalism anymore. So maybe I can also switch my career and do something else because we're okay now. Or maybe I can go to politics and create a party, political party, for example. But then I recognize that the road is still long and we need to work a lot, because in the transitional period, we will have a lot of challenges, a lot of things that we need to cover and to watch. And so many people need to be supported, giving a space for their voice through our stories and support them more and more, I guess. We still have a lot of things to do. Maybe this time I want to try my best to stay on the ground and not to leave again, if that's possible.
I deeply believe that the need for investigative journalism in Syria is as important as it ever was. While now there is like much more space for people to do journalism, and there is like an apparent surge like in freedom of speech, this is not guaranteed to stay the same. We need to hold the authority accountable to its action, and now that we have this space, we need to fight for it and try to keep it. Otherwise, the country could risk slipping into a different dictatorship. It's really hard to predict the future, but I think our role is really important in the transitional period.
I want to thank Bashar, Mais, and Charlotte for their time, not only speaking with us for Backlight, but for all the incredible work they did on this investigation. It really was an honor to work alongside them, and I want to echo what Charlotte said about how impressed I am at the strength and resilience of the Syrian journalists that we worked with to work on such an emotionally intense story. Please do check out the rest of the reporting. As we said earlier, there's a documentary on BBC I, there's a podcast in Arabic, and there's written pieces in English, Arabic, German, and Dutch. All of those will be linked in our show notes.
To keep updated with our investigations, you can follow us on our social media. Our Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Blue Sky handles are @LHReports, or you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. All of these are linked in the show notes.
This episode was produced and hosted by Tessa Pang and Beatriz and Tessa. It was sound edited and designed by Spuvio. Thank you for listening, and see you next month.